All right, so this is going to be first of 4 presentations that I'm going to do. Put out a Twitter poll. This was the most voted one. Going to go through the order and record the rest of them. I'm hoping to have them out month by month, but depending on scheduling and a bunch of other factors, that may get pushed back. So we'll get into this one first. So this one's going to be on tight versus loose movers. This presentation, compared to the others, is going to have a little bit more anecdotal evidence and some more theory in it than the others. Just because that's the case, it doesn't mean you can't apply this information. Just because something is anecdotal or theory doesn't mean that you still can't do it. So that being said, let's get into it. So what is a tight mover? It's going to be, in general, someone that has stiffness through movement. Their gait cycle is going to look stiff. They might look stiff in throwing or other rotational activities. You're just going to look stiff to the eye. These guys might appear to lack mobility. If you throw them on a table, you might find less than ideal range of motion. They might have bad hip ER or, bad shoulder ER. That might not be the case. Some guys might be fine. They might have normal range of motion measurements, but they still might look stiff. It all applies to the individual. You can also find some of these individuals that will have less than ideal range of motion measurements in their shoulders and hips, but have more mobility or more range of motion in more distal structures. So, the wrist or the ankle or the fingers or their toes, they might have more mobility in those areas. So just because they lack it in a more proximal structure doesn't always mean that they're going to lack it in the distal structure. So what do we do about lifting with tight movers? So these guys are going to be strength and power focused. So in general, they're going to be stronger relative to a loose mover. If we took one tight mover and one loose mover, the guy who's the tight mover is going to be stronger relative to the loose mover. There are obviously going to be situations where the loose mover is tighter than the stronger mover. This could be due to, age, genetics, so tons of factors. But in general, tight guy is going to be stronger. Loose guy going to be not as strong as the tight guy. These guys have already checked the strength and power box. They're most likely they're going to look bigger. They're going to have more musculature on them. The range of motion loss could be because of having just bigger muscles and now having to fight through that to move. There could be genetic factors into that. So in the weight room, I would chase speed with these guys. These guys are going to be lacking the ability to move fast. So any type of plyometric, jumping, sprinting, anything that's going to involve moving fast is going to be beneficial for these guys. If you're a fan of VBT, 0.9 to 1.2 would be a good range. Sometimes 0.8 depending on your findings, but getting these guys to move fast is going to be crucial. Now, putting them in a deep range of motion when they don't have a lot of range of motion can be good and can be bad depending on your findings. If you have a guy that, based on what you found, he needs to squat below parallel, squat him below parallel. If you find that he shouldn't squat below parallel, don't squat him below parallel. There's so many things that can be applied to this, but just finding out what you need for your given situation. So what are we going to see now from the throwing side of it? Well, you're not going to see deep positions. These guys lack deep range of motion, or they lack range of motion. They're not going to get into these deep positions. But deep range of motion also doesn't matter. There are tons of guys who throw hard without getting into crazy positions. It all depends on that person. If they're lacking mobility and you need to get them more, give them a little more. It's all, again, a lot of this is going to be the same message. It's just going to depend on your findings. That being said, going on to weighted balls now. With lighter weights, these guys could struggle with throwing lighter weights. Lighter balls can cause muscle up tendencies in these guys. They're used to muscling up, using that muscle driven force to throw the ball. So a lighter ball might cause more tensing and could cause some issues there. Heavier balls, on the other hand, can be really helpful for these guys because it can help them to feel positions. So if a guy is needing to get into a deeper flip up, giving him a blue ball could really be helpful to get him to feel a deeper position, or even, an 8, 9, 10, 11 ounce ball. Again, some people agree with those, some people don't. This does have a downside to it, per se. They could lack proprioception. We'll get into this more with the loose movers, but if a guy isn't sure where his body is, giving him more range of motion probably isn't the best idea. They could also have a pushy tendency, this being muscle dominant. That could result in the back leg jumping off the mound, feeling like they have to drive as hard as they can and jump to really get that feeling of, being powerful and exploding. So just something to watch out for with them. So going into programming, what would we do? So I'm big on the aerobic system. I have a presentation about it, but aerobic power to repeat high effort throws is going to be huge. These guys need to be well conditioned to throw. They're going to be using more muscle driven throwing, so therefore their body is going to take a lot bigger toll on their body, and they need to be able to supply their muscles with sufficient oxygen to perform these over and over and over and over again. So a focus needs to be put on training the aerobic system and aerobic power for these guys to throw late into games. Mobility, you may need to chase depending on velo and injury history. If a guy is always hurt and you deem that this is because he's lacking range of motion, you need to do that. Or if you think for him to gain velocity, he has to have more range of motion, do that. Not always the case. They might be missing some other piece of the puzzle. Speed will be the lowest hanging fruit. These guys will be able to produce a lot of power, but that power may take time to develop. We need RFD to be faster. We need these guys to be able to produce that power quickly and fast. So speed being the lowest hanging fruit is kind of, in my opinion, a no-brainer for these guys. Just chase it. These guys just need to get faster. This one's going to be now a little more theory going right here. So how do we manage stress in tight movers? They're going to have more soreness in their muscles than their fascial system. They have the potential to feel pumped days after. So what do I mean by this? So even though the CNS is responsible for sending signals and helping us move, these guys, since they're going to be using more muscular force versus nervous system force, that's a whole nother discussion. But since they're using more force from their muscles, these guys are going to have more muscular soreness day to day or after throwing. So this is going to be something that needs to be focused on in soft tissue work, or just keeping an eye on it and keeping an eye on it and understanding where that athlete's going to be. From a psychosocial aspect, these guys might be more meathead. They might, get after in the weight room. They might be lifting 6-7 days out of the week, might be doing 2 days. You might need to pull back the reins on these guys and making sure that they're, for better or worse, staying in their lane, and you're keeping an eye on them, make sure that they're not over pushing. So to summarize all of this, overall findings can tend to be pushy. They're searching for muscle dominance in their throw. Tendency for bad decel patterns, they're going to cut themselves off. They could be lacking range of motion. You won't see crazy positions because of this lack of range of motion. It's not always a bad thing. Could have pronation issues because they lack range of motion. Again, if they can't internally rotate their shoulder all the way, they could have trouble down the chain. Good stability. Overall, they're going to have good stiffness. These guys could be more stable because they just know they're just generally stiff. They can put more force into the ground to help with stability. So now going on to loose mover. So what's a loose mover? Well, the exact opposite of a fluid mover. The exact opposite of a tight mover. They're going to be more fluid in their gait and their rotation. They're just going to look more free in their movement. They may present with crazy range of motion. These guys, they're going to be hypermobile in proximal joints. They might have crazy range of motion. This range of motion might be what I call false range of motion, because they could have compensations getting them to this range of motion. Let's say you push them you're doing shoulder ER, you throw them on a table, their low back might, extend like crazy and their shoulder just keeps going because their body's just so loose, it can't create this stiffness. So that's not always the case, but sometimes these loose movers are going to have that. In their throwing, you're going to see more loose and whippy mechanics. Camilo Duvall, perfect example. So, anatomy of a moose luber on the table. What are we going to see? Well, we'll see a lot more passing range of motion measurements. We're going to likely see these compensations that, if they have them, at or after end range. These guys are going to be able to get into crazy positions, and therefore they might have compensations to get into these positions. Now, depending on injury history, velocity, a bunch of other factors, this may be something to look at, or it might be something to be like, you know what, cool that you have that. We'll just move on from there. In terms of these areas, their spine, in my opinion, you would typically see it as like super mobile. They might have crazy spinal rotation, extension. They might have some attribute of spinal mobility that's just through the roof. In my opinion, most likely to have an extension bias because there's no stability, because they're just going to be so loose. They're just going to be constantly in extension. Again, with baseball being an extension rotation sport, super common to see. Could have an unstable lumbar because of being stuck in all this extension all the time. That area could be kind of shaky. They're going to have general laxity, like their joints. They're going to be able to like get into crazy positions without warming up, just on their own. Could be hypermobile, not likely. Again, throw them through a test, see where they are. But in general, they're just going to have a ton of mobility or just super loose movements. So, lifting as a loose mover, what are we going to see here? They will need the opposite of a tight mover. They will need strength and power. You can't neglect speed because some of them will need speed, but they will need more strength and power work than a tight mover will. They will also have issues in deep range of motion. So, unlike tight movers that aren't able to get into it, these guys are able to get into deep range of motion almost too easily. So sometimes they can hang out in these passive structures, and that can cause issues to the shoulder, issues to the hip. Not always the case, but when working with them, make sure you understand when they are actively getting into those positions versus passively getting into those positions. How can we protect this? We can build hypertrophy around these joints. We can create stability with more muscle mass. If a guy has hypermobile shoulders, or if his elbows are hypermobile, or he's got some issue of his body not being able to support him, adding muscle mass around those structures is a great way to help support that area. These guys may need to be pushed a little bit more from a psychosocial aspect. These guys may be more lax, more like go with the flow, just kind of walking in, walking out. So getting on them and getting them to push themselves might be something to look at with these athletes. What I would do with them is I would run a conjugate or a vertical integration with them. Just give them everything, slightly increase what you need, but make sure you're still training everything with these guys. So throwing now. These guys are going to be more fascial driven. They're going to have more elastic properties to them. Edwin Diaz, very elastic, very, fascially driven. That dude is just getting up and going, very loose. They may be able to hold more counter rotation because they just have more mobility. They have more movement options to them because they just have more to move through. You will see crazy or deep positions. These positions may lack tension. They might be so lax and have so much mobility in their shoulder that they might have late arm because their arm now has to work through so much more range of motion to get up. So to fix this, I would work from the inside out. So look at, are they getting this from their low back? Are they getting this from their core? See where that movement is coming from, and then once you know where that movement is coming from, you can then prescribe drills and correctives or lifting or get some way to fix that issue rather than being like, oh, we need to get your arm up. Well, why isn't the arm getting up? It's getting up because of something. These guys might have poor proprioception. Feels drills may not be the best. They have so much range of motion, they might just not know where they are. So giving them a feel drill or a drill to feel something, they might not feel it in general. So just understanding where they're at. With this being said, if you have an athlete that will go back and use the example of struggling to get their arm up, if they can't get their arm up and you tell them, hey, I want you to throw, I want your arm to be up at 90, they could put their arm up and their elbow could be up here and it'd be like, well, it feels like my arm's at 90. It's not at 90, dude. It's like a foot above 90. So making sure they understand where they are and doing this with tension. If you're not moving with tension or moving through tension or using tension to move, you're not owning that movement. Your body's just moving through space. You need that body to powerfully move through space. So with plyo balls, heavy balls can be good, it can be bad. It can be good for the guys that need strength and power that don't have proprioception issues, but for guys that have proprioception issues, getting them into an even deeper position is not a good idea. In this case, a lighter ball would be better because they're not going to feel like they have to get into as deep a position to throw it hard. So giving them more of a sense of where they are in space is going to be huge for these guys. So how do we program them? Well, build body awareness and proprioception. Give them the ability to know where their limbs are. Give them drills and put them in situations and constraints where they're forced to understand where their body is in space, rather than, just telling them, hey, I want you to throw this ball, do this drill. Okay, what do you feel? I don't feel anything. Obviously, they're not going to feel anything. You don't know where their body is. If you're working on front leg, put a hurdle in front of them, or, if they need to feel back hip, have them drop into it. Give them something so that they're responding with their environment rather than with their own body. Chase hypertrophy around joints, build stability. If they're lacking stability in an area, lift some weights, get bigger, put some actual, just put stuff around that joint, put muscle around there so that joint becomes stable. With range of motion, if they have outlier range of motion and if it's benefiting them, maintain it. How do you know when to do this? Health and velo are your indicators. In every circumstance, health and velo are going to be the first two things you look at. Is this athlete healthy and are they throwing hard? If one of those is suffering, something's going on. So with range of motion, if they're healthy and their velo's good, keep giving them that out. Make sure they maintain that outlier range of motion. If they're not, if one of those is suffering and you think, range of motion might be something to look at it. So managing stress in loose movers. This part is going to be more theory-based, just like it was in tight movers. So fatigue post-high effort throwing will be more general tiredness. Why is this going to happen? CNS demand of repeated action. If we're constantly repeating a high effort throw, the body the next day is just going to be tired. They're going to feel like they just did a lot. Muscle fatigue is going to be common. They're using their muscles as anchor points, and they're using their tendons to develop power and elasticity. So if that's the case, those muscles are going to be taxed to the max, trying to hold everything in place. So you're going to see a lot of muscular fatigue and a lot of just overall tiredness in these athletes. There's a high demand on the CNS and fascial system. These guys are just going to be tired the next day. They might present as stiff movers the next day because they've just gotten so much loose rotation and just very elastic properties to them that the next day they're just going to be tired. I know that's a kind of out there answer, but that's just kind of what I think right now. So overall findings on loose movers. They can present with too much range of motion. If that's the case, check for compensations. If it's something beneficial, keep it. If not, then do what you will with it. Build a strength base while chasing hypertrophy. Support them. If they're lacking stability in a certain area, they need to get stronger. And if they need to get stronger, most likely need to get bigger. So give them some muscle. Timing issues are going to be super common in throwing. They're going to lack tension and have crazy range of motion. That's a deadly combination together. They're going to be moving in crazy positions, having no idea where their body is. Timing that up is going to be tough. Structures may be damaged over time from hanging out in end range without tension. These guys might, go into a squat, go ass to grass, but there's no tension there. All that is going to be a cueing thing. Tell them where to go and what to do, and these guys are going to be able to do it. So that's it for this presentation. This is the first of 4. I know this one was kind of long. It did have a lot of anecdotal things in it and some theory, but just an interesting thing to look at. I've always heard the argument of tight versus loose mover, so I just wanted to present my thoughts on it, and that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed.